Happy Trans Day of Visibility, everyone. My name is Nicole Parker, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am the Director of Transgender Equality for Equality Florida. I feel like it's been so long since we did TransChat, so I'm so excited to be here with you today. And we have two amazing panelists who are doing incredible work here in the state of Florida. I would love to introduce the amazing Sine Julian and Maya Monet. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
How are you doing? Happy Trans Day of Visibility.
Happy Trans Day of Visibility. I'm representing with my shirt
Yes,
today.
I love it. So I want to definitely jump into this conversation. I'm so excited. Thank you both so much for being here today. So first and foremost, I would love for you to introduce yourself and talk about your journey to living authentically. You know, I know trans and non-binary folks, it's a little difficult sometimes figuring out who we are, how we're going to present, how we're going to tell our family and friends, and just standing and living authentically in a world that tells us that we're not human. So I would love to start with you, Sine.
Yes. So, hello, everybody. Welcome and happy Trans Day of Visibility. It is so amazing to share space with all of you. My name is Sine Julian. As you heard, I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am the reproductive justice organizer for Florida Access Network, which is a abortion fund in Orlando, Florida.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Maya?
I am Maya Monet. Pronouns are she, her, aya. I identify as a trans woman, lesbian, asexual, and I am the social media coordinator for One Orlando Alliance, as well as the newly installed vice president of Come Out with Pride Orlando.
Oops, I was muted. Sorry. I love that. Thank you all so much. So I'll start with you, Maya. Can you tell us a little bit about what was your journey to living authentically?
Oh, well, it was a long one. I always say it came to womanhood by the scenic route because, it took me almost 40 years to really accept that I was transgender. Of course, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I graduated in high school in 1989. So we didn't have the advantage of the internet or a lot of media representation, a lot of visibility, out there to help guide my way. So, when I was going to junior high, I was starting to have these feelings around puberty that something just didn't feel right. Or I had these desires that I interpreted back then as somehow being dirty, unclean, these kind of thoughts that boys aren't supposed to have, which was only more confusing because I was also attracted to girls at the same time. So, the idea that I could be a lesbian and a trans woman wasn't something that seemed in the realm of possibility. And the girls I was attracted to were also the girls I really wanted to be at the same time. And that just didn't seem right either. So, from there, I went on to college after high school, and that's where I met my future wife. And I think, like any good lesbian, I moved in with her like the day after I graduated college and got married a year later. Part of that was running away from myself. Like, if I had really thought about it, if I had really been brave, when I graduated college, I'm from New York, my family's all there. So I could have gone to New York City and I probably would have figured it out myself a lot sooner, a lot faster. I know I probably would have ended up in the queer communities down there singing, which is what I love to do more than anything, and just discovering myself, becoming more of an artistic person than I thought I was up to that point. I was actually an engineer in my first year of college, which that was a disaster. I shouldn't have done that. So I got married. We were married for about 15 years. And it was sometime after the death of my father. Excuse me, that's my dog.
Okay.
In 2010, that I started looking at my life really hard and trying to figure out what it is that made me so unhappy. My father would always ask me throughout my life, why are you so unhappy? You have everything, right? I had the quote unquote the American dream. I was married, I had a kid, we were making very good money, living in a beautiful home in a master plan community in a very conservative part of Houston, Texas. And, I couldn't answer him. I really couldn't answer him. And I remember thinking, when he passed, one of the first thoughts I had was, well, now he knows why I was so unhappy.
Mm.
And my father was a person who my sisters and I have 3 younger sisters. We all felt that he died with some sort of significant regret. What that was, we're not exactly sure, whether it was about his orientation and or what have you. I don't know. All I know is that I didn't want to die with that same kind of regret. So I started doing research, and I came across a discussion board where I saw these trans people talking to each other. Actually, it was cross dressers talking to each other, and I went over there first because I thought maybe that's what I was. And what I found was they were coming up with different ways of simulating breasts and stuff like that. And it occurred to me, I didn't want that. I wanted the real thing, you know? And so I kind of drifted over to the transgender discussion board that was in the same part of the same website. And I started reading people's introductions. And that's when it actually hit me, like in the middle of the night, that I actually was transgender. I had been lying to myself the whole time because, you know, I really wasn't the, oh, I like to play with Barbie dolls kind of girl, you know, and I kind of had this idea that to be a trans woman, that was the kind of thing you were, you know, you were kind of ultra feminine, that kind of thing. It turns out what I was more like a lesbian growing up, you know, playing sports and that kind of thing, the stereotype of that at least. And it was sometime later, after giving it a lot of thought, I came out to my then wife. I started going to see a therapist a few months later. Okay, we're gonna have to people in front of the house. That's what happens with the dog. But yeah, I started going to a therapist who, in my first session, I said, "Well, I'm transgender," and I remember her stopping and like flipping forward and goes, "Oh, I thought this was going to take us like months to get there." That, you know, for me to admit it, and then shortly thereafter, you know, I got my letter to start hormones. I started hormones in October of 2010. It was right around that time that my ex-wife decided that she didn't want to remain married to a woman. She's not a lesbian or queer in any way, and this wasn't something she wanted to do. So filed for divorce in November 2010. By January of 2011, I was living here in Orlando because my mother lived in Claremont and I needed a place to go. A little while later, I started working for Disney and they essentially funded my transition. And then from there, I just started getting to know people in the community. And now I feel like I know a lot of people and I've gotten more and more involved in the life of you know, LGBTQIA plus Orlando. And that's what brings me here.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And, you know, you hit on so many points that I think folks, a lot of the times, you know, you'll hear like, oh, you're choosing to do this with your life. We're choosing to live authentically because we knew, and maybe we couldn't put it into words. Maybe we couldn't figure out what it was, but we knew something was different about us. And all that we did was choose to live authentically like everyone else. And there's this narrative, you know, there's many narratives about us trans folks, but the one thing is I think we're super brave because the world is telling us that we don't see you and we're going to live authentically anyways. And I think that's the beautiful thing about it. So thank you so much, Maya. How about you, Sine? What was your journey to living authentically?
I actually love that saying. I say that all the time. Living authentically is like my favorite thing to say when I talk about gender or trans issues. It's amazing. But I think my journey, just I feel like for me, and I'm only 21. It took me a long time to get to this point. And I'm only in college, but I still feel like, you know, there's some things, if I would have went back in time and changed, I felt like I could have made that revelation earlier. But I feel like things happen for a reason. I feel like I've always grown up queer. I feel like I first came out to my mom when I want to say like 12 or 11. I was in sixth grade. And I came out as bisexual. And I feel like that's kind of like the stereotype, everyone comes out as bisexual. But I feel like it's really valid too, because it's kind of like you're opening into sexual orientation and what it's like to, you know, experience things that are outside of what is normal in society. So yeah, so that's when I first came out. And my family's really accepting. My mom was super just like, okay. Like she didn't ask any questions. She probably asked like one question, but like she probably asked me like, do I like girls or boys more? But that's probably it. I think after I came out as bi, I think the next year I came out as lesbian. And I've been lesbian pretty much my entire life up until maybe like college. I started like identifying as queer. And also in college, that's when I first realized that I was non-binary. And I've met a couple of other folks who are non-binary before. And I just felt like it aligned with who I was. And for a long time, I struggled with my transness because when I first heard about like what being trans was, I was probably like in fifth grade. And the first YouTuber that I watched who was trans is Ty Turner. And I started getting into a lot of like watching a lot of transition videos, watching people's journeys, how they feel so liberated, they feel themselves. And I resonated with a lot of it, but I don't know if maybe I was so hung up on my perception because at that time, not when I was in fifth grade, but when I was like in high school and stuff, and I got older, I realized myself like really forcing this hyper feminized version of myself. And I didn't know what it was. And I was like super insecure. Middle school, I was going through like a lot of depression, and it kind of like seeped into like high school and college. And I feel like part of it was because I feel like I was internally denying my transness.
Mm.
So I felt like identifying as non-binary, finally, it gave me that gateway to feeling that liberation that I resonated with so much when I was younger, watching other people transition and live authentically in their truth. But I definitely say that it takes a lot of time. I felt like also since I chose UCF, it's really good for queer students, especially because I'm a part of Lavender Council, which is a student advisory board for queer students, to represent folks and also do safe zone trainings for staff, faculty, and student organizations on campus. So we have that. We have Pride Commons, which is a safe space for queer folks. There's a lot of non-binary and trans folks that go to UCF. So, and of course, Orlando is a really big like queer community here. So I felt like that also helped me gain the confidence to, step outside of the gender norm. Because I think that was something kind of like internally scary for me, but I don't know why. Because I've always been queer. So accepting that part of me internally kind of I hesitated for some reason, but I didn't understand why.
Mhm.
Um but I've identified as non-binary. And I've switched around my pronouns so many times. If you ask my friends, my pronouns switch like a lot, but I think they, them is my safe space now. But when I first came out as non-binary, I came out also as trans, and it took me a while to kind of like understand because there is also this kind of like discourse between whether non-binary is a trans identity. And at the time I thought that my Black womanhood really like influenced me being non-binary, so I was okay with people still referring to me as a woman, but I internally it made me feel like really uncomfortable.
Mhm.
um and for some people's experience, like that's totally fine. And I feel like a lot of times it's about like what people personally resonate with.
Right.
um and at the time I thought that's what I did. But now I feel like I my perception of my non-binary identity is kind of my own, even though I kind of present feminine still. I'm still very valid in my transness and my femininity as well. So that's kind of how I got to where I am now. I did hormonally transition for like 9 months on T, but then I stopped.
Mhm.
So now I'm where I'm at now.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's so important for folks to understand that trans comes in all different shapes and sizes and colors. No, not necessarily does someone who identifies as trans or non-binary have to go through a transition. Someone could just simply identify as themselves and feel validated as themselves and just move through life. I think sometimes we're put into this box that you have to have this to be trans, you have to look like this to be non-binary, or whatever the case may be. And it's just, that's not true. At the end of the day, I think the beauty of this world is that we're a melting pot and all of our experiences are different. Because imagine if we all looked the same. Imagine if we all presented the same, how boring life would be. So I think that that is so important. Sine, I know that you talked a little bit about this, but historically in communities of color, it's very difficult for them to accept folks being trans and non-binary. So for you, Maya, as a Latina woman, can you talk about what was that experience telling your family and how did they kind of navigate that?
um, well, I got a similar question to the one Sine got from her family when it came out to my mom. But in her case, it was, well, how long have you known that you are attracted to men? Because it didn't seem possible to her that I would transition and still be attracted to women. Um, my mom is and has been, right. Uh, my mom always has been very kind of unaccepting of my gender identity. And she does not, to this day, I actually don't speak to her anymore. So to put it in that sense, it's not a great relationship, not anymore. But I gave her 10 years. I gave her 10 years to adjust. And it was not a fun time in those 10 years. Spanish, she is from Bogota, Colombia. So Spanish is a gendered language. So unlike English, where you might get misgendered once in a while, from her, I got misgendered like every other sentence, it seemed like. It was really terrible. And it started giving me anxiety attacks, which I could not stomach anymore. So after speaking with my therapist, I decided to cut off contact with her a little over a year ago. However, my three younger sisters and the rest of her family have been really accepting. So I have had family support, and I was the oldest and presumably a boy in the family. And in Latinx families, that's a pretty big deal, to be the oldest and be considered el varón, and it was gratifying to know I had the support of everybody else but her. But of course, she's a very important part of my life. And it's been very, very difficult to live without her. It makes things like the holidays much more complicated, like who's going to spend who at the holidays and that kind of thing. And despite the fact that, she comes from a very large family in Colombia. At one point there was 14 of them. She's the oldest living surviving member of them at this point. And I was the firstborn, so I'm also one of the oldest cousins, because I have feels like hundreds of cousins on that side of the family, who are all much younger than me. So I don't really have a problem with them, and I've gone to Thanksgiving and I've done all those things. So that's been great. On my mom's side, on my father's side, my father came from a very small family. I've spoken to my uncle and my grandmother on that side, and they've been perfectly fine as well. So things went a lot better than I really expected them to. I had problems with friends, especially in Texas when I came out, because they were very conservative. And I had that one huge significant problem with my mom, which, unfortunately, she's a central figure in your life, no matter what kind of relationship you have with your mother. She will always be your mom, and that presents complications. And I apologize, Sine, for misgendering you earlier.
Yeah, I did. It's okay.
They, them.
No, we all make mistakes. It's okay.
Yeah, but I think it's important to acknowledge them, apologize, and when we all make mistakes. You're right, but I mean, I think it's important to also acknowledge when they're when they happen.
And thank you for sharing that. I can definitely identify, it's been 10 years since I transitioned, and there's still a large portion of my family that's never even met me this way. And, I'll get a text message on my birthday maybe or Christmas, but they choose to kind of stay far, and that's okay. I can love them from afar. But like you said, there are certain members of your family that are kind of staples, and, holidays come around or things come around and something feels like it's missing, so I can definitely identify with that. Sine, I know that you talked about how your mom was, just asked a question and affirmed you. Was that kind of the case with the rest of your family?
Yeah, I don't really talk much to my dad's side of the family. I talk more to my mom's side of the family. I feel like when it came to my sexuality, me coming out was like nothing. Like it wasn't a big deal. But I feel like once when I came out as trans to them,
Right.
I feel like it was a little harder.
Hmm.
Just because it's another layer, like you can't get misgendered. You can't get misgendered with sexuality. So I have to deal with like getting misgendered sometimes. And then I also like changed my name. So like having to remind people, using the correct name, even though for me, my name now was my middle name, but it was supposed to be my first name when I was born. So, kind of like reclaiming it. But so it's kind of like reminding people like when I first came out. Um, and once when I started hormones, I was just like a whole another layer of like emotions and like kind of like talking through because I know my mom was like really worried. And I feel like she just wanted to make sure that I was making like the right decision, I was being safe. Um, and like I told her before, because I actually recently just told her that I haven't been on T since maybe December of 2021. And it's her first time like knowing, and I thought I told her before, but I guess I didn't. And um, you know, having that conversation, kind of like revisiting it, being like full circle, like I told her like I don't regret taking it. And even like with kind of like the conflict with taking hormones, it caused us to kind of have more conversations about, what being trans is like, how that experience is for me. She always tries her best to like remember my pronouns and ask for my pronouns, and using my name. Um, and that's what I can appreciate, even though it was really hard for me emotionally because I didn't want her to worry about me,
Right.
especially because I was trying to reassure her like it's safe, like it's fine. Um, but yeah, it was a lot. But I think at the end of the day, my family means well, they love me and they do accept me. Even though it may have taken a couple of people just a little longer. But I think it was all worth it, and then to be honest.
Absolutely. It's all a journey. We're on a journey. And I know for me, speaking just for myself, when I first transitioned, I felt that, okay, my name's Nicole. Everyone needs to follow suit. These are my pronouns. Everyone needs to follow suit. And I had to take a step back and I'm like, I got to give, especially my family, a little bit of grace, just to kind of get there because I was, they weren't realizing that I had been thinking about this for years. I wasn't vocal about it, but when I was ready, I expected everyone to. So I think, and every family dynamic is different, but sometimes it does just take a little time and a little bit more education and exposure for them to come around. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And as you know, today is Trans Day of Visibility. So let's talk about why visibility matters. Maya, you are, if correct me if I'm wrong, the first trans board vice president for Come Out with Pride. Can you talk about that? Talk about what Come Out with Pride does and what it means to you to be in this position.
Well, I'm actually the first vice president in the history of Pride, period. We actually created the position just a few weeks ago because Pride has become such a large event that, and it's an all volunteer board. I don't know if everybody realizes that we dedicate so many hours. I mean, I'm already working on stuff. Also, the Pride Prom is next month, if I can plug that, April 16th, a second chance to dance, we're calling it, at the Orlando Museum of Art on April 16th. Get tickets to that right now on the comeoutwithpride.org website. But yeah, an amazing experience. I mean, when I joined the board, I was the only trans person at the time. I'm not the first trans person who's ever been on the Pride board, though. I mean, there have been others. Gina Duncan, I believe, was on the Pride board at one point, and a few other folks like that. We have now since added another transgender woman, actually, to the Pride board. So, and more women in general, and more Latinx people in general, actually. With immigrant experiences and and all the rest. I think diversity is an important part of Pride in general, and I think it should be reflected in the board as well. And I think we're starting to see that. We also hired an executive director who is a lesbian woman herself. So in a lot of different ways, Pride is starting to balance out, and we're offering our viewpoints, and we're having our own internal battles. We may do things as a board, but that doesn't mean always that there's agreement. But I think we do have an understanding of what it means to cooperate in this sort of environment, and that none of us can represent everybody.
Right.
I can't represent all transgender people. I mean, I'm a pretty binary trans woman, and the transgender community is incredibly varied. You know, as Sine was saying, when they were talking about their own struggles with gender identity, and kind of figuring out, and am I part of the trans community? Am I part of, I mean, that is something we grapple with as part of a board as well, when we're doing things like coming up with themes, and how we're going to represent it, and all the rest. But I have to say, as much work as it is, and it can be almost a full-time job at times, in terms of the number of hours, it was amazing to see Pride last year. It was my first one, and to see 200,000 people kind of just show up and suddenly have a place to go, after 2 years in a pandemic and all the rest, was just, it made it worth it. And we're trying to do more things this year, which is one of the reasons why we came up with Pride Prom. In fact, I came up with Pride Prom, to be honest. And the reason I did was because so much of what we do is political, and so much of what we do is has a basis in historical discrimination, I guess you can say. From Sylvia Rivera, and at Stonewall, and how she was received back in the early 1970s by the overall gay community, and how that legacy, to an extent, still is part of Pride. It's some of the things we need to examine, or even the fact that why things like the Compton cafeteria riots happened was because trans people weren't allowed to go to gay clubs. So there's things like that have happened that means that our safe spaces, or what are considered the safe spaces in the LGBTQI community, aren't always safe spaces for everybody. We don't always feel, I know as a transgender person, that I can walk into a gay club and feel like I'm not going to face any kind of transphobia, because it's happened. And so the whole idea of Pride Prom was to create something that was just fun, that didn't have to be anything else except fun.
Right.
And would be a place where I think both gay people and trans people, queer people and trans people, would be able to get an equal amount out of it, because they weren't able to go to prom. I know a lot of butch lesbians who, they show me their photos of themselves wearing dresses to prom, and they did it because mom wanted them to, and they were not comfortable with it. So, and then of course they had to go with boys or as part of a group, which is not what they wanted. So they have that aspect of it. And of course, as somebody who went to, graduate in 1989, I could not go as my authentic self to prom, So being able to go as the woman I am, and to provide that opportunity for anybody to go as who they authentically are, I think is something that I wanted to do. And I hope it's a tradition we can keep going for the future. Ticket sales are going pretty well. So, knock on wood. I hope it continues into the future.
No, that's so amazing. And thank you so much, because as we know, historically, a lot of us don't really see ourselves represented in Pride. I know for a long time, I kind of went and I was like, I know this is a space for me, but is it? And it's beautiful to see how things are turning, especially here in Orlando, and just seeing how, especially last year, it was just so diverse. There were so many things, there were so many places. And I was just like, okay, all right, we're moving the needle. So thank you so much for all that you do. Sine, if you all don't know, Sine is a reproductive justice warrior who is out here fighting for the rights of all of us. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think sometimes people forget trans and non-binary people need abortion access too, and we need advocates fighting for that. So I would love for you to talk about the work that you do.
100%. So, like I mentioned before, I'm the reproductive justice organizer for Florida Access Network. And Florida Access Network is a nonprofit and also an abortion fund. And as an abortion fund, we serve the entire state of Florida. And we provide stipends for abortion procedures. And then we also do practical support, which is basically kind of like if you heard of mutual aid before, but in the sense of where we give out like stipends for ride shares. We give out money for groceries and food. We help folks with transportation, whether that be through rideshare like Lyft, Uber, or if we have practical support volunteers that are available and in that area, those folks will help transport folks to and from their appointment when needed and if needed, and things like that. And aside from that, Florida Access Network also has a support group for folks who have had abortions before. And that happens every other Wednesday, I believe, at 7:30 p.m. And it is in collaboration with Peer Support Space, which is really amazing. We connect a lot with a lot of different organizations, Women's March Jacksonville, a bunch of local Planned Parenthood organizers in the state of Florida, a bunch of abortion providers that we also collaborate with for the pledges and also for any events or any like kind of gratitude things. The most recent thing that we did, which was for March 10th, which was Abortion Providers Appreciation Day. We did gratitude cards. So we made about 73 of them and we fundraised $500+ to donate a bunch of self-care items for individual baskets for all the staff for about 4 clinics in Florida. So it was one in, I think it was like 2 in Jacksonville, one in Orlando, and one in Gainesville. So it was really amazing. They really loved it. And I think the ones in Jacksonville also got pizza. So it was really cool. Yes, what you said about the conversation leaving out a lot of trans and non-binary folks, I feel like that happens very often because of the origin of the movement. I feel like it always has left out trans folks and especially a lot of queer folks as well. It's very much known that if a lesbian or someone who is sapphic or bisexual or a queer cis woman walks into a clinic and they say that they need services, they kind of don't get taken seriously. And it's just as worse for trans and non-binary folks. And I'm not sure where the stigma stems from, but I feel like transphobia can be within one of those things that stigma comes from. And it's something that we have to continue to address. We have to continue to be using gender neutral terms and language and words, because not only do we get left out of the conversation, but we also get left out of the actions that happen because of these things. And a lot of the times when bans come up, especially the 15-week abortion ban that I believe is waiting to get signed by DeSantis, along with the 24-hour waiting period that will be effective, I believe, tomorrow. So it's a lot of things that can really affect marginalized folks, especially if they are trans, non-binary, or queer and a person of color. A lot of barriers can be really impeding on that, and we have to continue to uplift that. We can't continue to move the movement along with language that only centers a certain amount of people within our audience. We have to ensure that we're including all of our community, and trans folks are super 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 important because we can't leave them out. If we do, then that's someone else within our collective liberation that isn't getting access to the things that they need.
Thank you so much for saying that because it's so true. You know, language matters and it's so important to make sure that we're including folks because the way that the world goes and everything going so fast, people just look at what's on the document and keep moving, but we have to move away from that. We have to see people's humanity and treat them accordingly because I think when it comes to accessing resources like you said, folks will go in and just not be taken seriously. And imagine how that makes someone feel. You're like, I've already, got the courage to come in here and ask for resources. And it's like, do you see me? Hello, I'm here. So thank you for sharing that. And that, leads me into the next part of the conversation. 2022's session was horrific. It was some of the most horrific things I have ever seen, I have ever heard. With the Don't Say Gay bill, the 15-week abortion ban. Can you just talk a little bit about, how does that make you feel as a trans and non-binary person here in Florida, seeing this horrible legislation that is affecting youth and affecting folks that are accessing resources? How does that make you feel as a human being? And anyone can jump in on that.
Yeah, I would love to start because I'll make it super quick, but definitely say that, especially as one of the organizations who came up to Tallahassee multiple times throughout session to represent and make sure that our rights are being sought after. It's really tiring. It was a lot of burnout. And for folks who came up for the Florida for Reproductive Freedom, there was a rally. Planned Parenthood also did another rally for the House bill hearing for its third reading, I believe, on February 16th. For folks who came up multiple times, especially as volunteers, as supporters of these organizations who came and stood on the Florida Capitol breezeway, like, you knew how intense that felt. It was a lot. And even when we went inside the House chamber and watched them vote, even though they didn't vote until later in the day because they had other things in the agenda, which I think they did on purpose. It was just really hectic, especially because there was a bunch of other student organizations or youth-led organizations coming to fight in solidarity for abortion access. It was just a lot. Like, seriously, it was a bunch. But I think in the end, it showed how related we kind of all are on these issues. And it shows that we do have a stronger sense of community than maybe some of our legislators don't understand or don't think. We have more trust in ourselves than I think they let on. And I just hope that next legislative session, they listen to their people who they represent and the organizations that also give them the information so that they can make an informed decision for communities that they represent. So that's kind of how I felt as a trans person as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. How about you, Maya?
Well, I mean, abortion is healthcare, right? And I think healthcare and the ability to control our own bodies is something that we all have in common, whether we're trans or not, whether I can carry a child or not, right? So, and I don't think people realize to the extent to which so many trans people also get their hormone therapy at Planned Parenthood and other organizations like that, where they may be turned away from other more traditional medical clinics, etc. As for don't say trans or gay, and I always call it trans or gay. It's something I've actually brought up to, I won't name them, but spokespeople at certain Florida organizations, as well as politicians in Florida, who are fighting for our rights, and rightly so, and wonderfully. They're putting in the hard work in what was an incredibly brutal session. So many things happened. But the fact that we still call it "Don't Say Gay," for the sake of a pithy slogan or political expediency, we're erasing trans people from that conversation every time we say "Don't Say Gay," because the law also affects gender identity and trans people and non-binary people equally. And it bothers me quite a lot when I see that happening in very much the same way it happened with HRC. When Barney Frank told HRC that if they tossed gender identity out of ENDA, it had a chance of passing Congress, and HRC did it back in I think it was 2009 or 2007. Back in the OOs at one point. Something for which HRC now apologizes profusely. And they know they shouldn't have done it. And history repeats itself. Here we are today talking about don't say gay, don't say gay, don't say gay, and fixating on sexual orientation. And it bothers me that we are not using our language to represent everybody when we easily can. And that we are paying attention, or the greater queer community is only paying attention to certain issues. And I've been to those rallies in front of City Hall when it's the anti-transports bill, or I'm sure in the next legislative session they'll probably take up a medical ban for for trans youth, just like they recently just passed yesterday in Arizona. And I know that we're not going to get 500 people in front of City Hall. I just know it. We're going to get the usual 40 to 50 people. And I was on Twitter yesterday, and there was a gay guy talking about how a lot of this has been basically creating an environment where it's becoming possible to be homophobic again. In terms of possibly repealing marriage, gay marriage from the books, because they now have a Supreme Court that might be amenable to doing that, and also, of course, repealing Roe v. Wade at the same time. And it really hurts my soul to know that these same people were talking about it as if it came out of nowhere. The Don't Say Gay bill, have not been paying attention to the last X amount of years where they've been picking on the trans community and laying the groundwork there, and now are shifting focus. It's like they didn't expect it to come for them, that it came for us first, and now it's coming for them, and it's also coming in other fronts, abortion rights, etc. They're pushing, it's incrementalism is what it is, just like they did with abortion rights, or they just keep trimming the amounts of weeks until they effectively ban abortion. And they've been doing it to trans rights as well. So it really bothers me that we're here at this point. All we can do, of course, is move forward as a unified community, which is, I hope, what we see going forward.
Yeah, me personally, I sometimes feel, no, I all the time feel that way too, that trans and non-binary folks, we're the first to show up for the community, regardless who it's an attack on. If it's an attack on the LGBTQ community, we're there to fight. But when it's us, I look around. Last year was the deadliest year on record, with 57 plus murders of trans and non-binary people. And some of the Trans Day of Remembrance events I went to were barely filled. And I was gutted by that, because I'm like, do you not see us? We're screaming. We need your help. We need your support. And sometimes I feel like they turn a blind eye because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Oh, that's a trans issue. No. It's an LGBTQ plus issue. And we're a community as a whole, and we have to stand together and fight for each other. So thank you for bringing that up. I completely agree. It's hard to be visible in especially a state that says that we're not human, a state that has every word in the book about us that's just not true. All this rhetoric of groomers and pedophiles and all of these things that just simply aren't true. But I want to know, I'll start with you, Sine, why do you choose to be visible?
I choose to be visible because, and I say this like every time I get a chance to speak somewhere, I choose to be visible because there are people in my community who may have barriers to be visible, or who may not have the opportunity to, or the chance to, or the resources to. I represent folks who aren't able to represent themselves. And I feel like that's super important in the work that I do as a community organizer, and also in like the multiple communities that I represent. It's super important that I'm able to, be there to speak for folks, and be able to kind of just make sure that I am putting folks' choices at like as a priority in these spaces. Because like we said before, in the reproductive space, a lot of times we leave out trans and non-binary folks, and that's the same in other conversations as well, especially in the Black community as well. I know a lot of queer and trans folks struggle with getting their issues also as top priority in the Black community as well. Especially I do too sometimes, but that's things that we have to overcome and come together as a community to address. And I feel like that's why I choose to be visible. Um, Especially because I have the ability to be, and not a lot of folks do. And I want to be able to uplift those, even if they feel like they don't have the access to, because that is so important.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. How about you, Maya? Why do you choose to be visible?
Um, because I can, and I think it makes a large impact. I'm not a young person, um, and I've had so many. I'm going to say middle-aged, middle-aged trans people come up to me and say, "Thank you for doing what you're doing. You've shown me it's possible." I mean, probably more through my YouTube channel more than anything. I don't have like, I'm not one of these 100,000 subscriber people, but 18,000 is significant. And I've had like something like 3 million lifetime views. And I know I could talk to people for the rest of my life and probably not be able to talk to 3 million people, you know? And I get messages that are heartbreaking from trans people, telling me that, I've inspired them in some way or I gave them hope. And I think that's why I do it, because I didn't have me. I didn't have a me to look for when I was coming out. Um, and being in these mediums like Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and all these places, all these social media places, I also have the ability to speak to young people as well as older people. There aren't as many um, transgender people out there my age, and there are not that many trans lesbians. In fact, I know of a very, very large trans YouTuber who I won't mention, and she's got like 1 million subscribers who followed me the other day. And I was like very flattered. I'd spoken to her at a YouTube conference once, but I didn't think she remembered who I was. And I started a conversation with her and I said, "Why did you follow me, by the way?" And she said, "Because there are not that many trans lesbian YouTubers out there, talking about their experience." And being visible gives me the ability to break down stereotypes as well. I mean, I I have the privilege of not being seen as trans in most social situations. My experiences taught me that I can walk into bars and at any point or any women's room, and I'm not going to be asked out of it. Being told that I don't belong there, and I've weaponized that privilege because it allows me to speak to people in a way that other people may not be able to, and it allows me to show that trans people are much more than you think of, than the stereotypes on TV or the stereotypes cisgender people put forth of us usually, in media and the rest. So I think it's important for the people like me out there, the people not like me out there, to see a living, breathing example of a transgender person. And I can afford to do it because I own my own business. I am involved in all these orgs. I don't have to worry about whether I'm going to lose my job. I play tennis with a group of people up in San Lando Park, and one of them is a trans woman who works like a construction job, and that's the only place she can be who she is, because when she's at work, she knows that she will lose her job if she comes out.
Right.
And that's an incredibly difficult position to be in. And I am privileged enough to have the opportunity to be able to talk to people and do it without, well, those consequences, at least. There's always consequences for speaking out on trans rights, but yeah, at least I don't have to face those. I can feed myself still. I can carry on a society still. And and once you lose everything, like I did when I first came out, my job, my home, my marriage, all that stuff, it's also liberating, and it has allowed me to do it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Visibility is so important. There's this amazing quote that be the person you needed when you were younger. And that's why I choose to be visible, because when I transitioned, I knew of trans folks, but I hadn't met one. And I finally did meet one at, I think, 19, and she changed my life. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, I can do this. Oh, this is because I would talk to folks and see things, but I had never really met a person. And I wanted to make sure that in the same way I choose to use my privilege to be in the spaces that I'm in to uplift our community, because that's what we have to do. We have to continue to move the needle, because if folks aren't standing up for us, then how are we going to achieve liberation? So I just was like, listen, I'm going to use my voice. I've been picked on, all through, like, the beginning of your transition, when you don't present the way that you want to, and you kind of go through all that. As hard as it is, you build up an armor. And I'm like, you know what? I'll use this armor to advocate. I can take what people are saying about me, but I look at trans youth. I look at non-binary youth. Today, I had the opportunity to meet with, at the Center Orlando, meet with Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona, Congressman Darren Soto, and LGBTQ parents and trans and non-binary youth. And I'm just sitting and listening to them talk and seeing them be affirmed in their families and going to school, living authentically. And that's why I choose to advocate, because I want to make sure that young people can live authentically. And folks, at the end of the day, people think that you need to transition or do things in a certain time frame. There's no timeline. However long it takes you to get to the point that you're comfortable, that's fine. You know what I mean? You don't need to fit in the box. Like I said, you don't need to get certain surgeries, be medically transitioned, do anything like that. You figure out what makes you happy in here, and you follow that, because we have one life to live, and we have to live happily. So as we close out this amazing conversation, I want to ask you both one last question, and I'll start with you, Sinem. If someone is struggling with their gender identity or living authentically, what is something that you would suggest to them? Some words of advice.
I definitely say take your time and don't feel like you need to rush to make a decision. Um, you have so many years. I know people say, your life is short, you only have one life, but you literally have so much time. You don't need to figure it out now.
Right.
Just know that and if you're not ready to be socially out, because that I feel like that is most important for people. Like being socially out, feeling like you're living in your authentic self is what most matters. Um, but yeah, I say definitely taking your time is number one. And whichever path you choose, you can feel free to change it. You can identify as whatever you want, literally. Pronouns, anything. Because like I said, I've changed my pronouns so many times. I've changed my gender identity so many times because certain labels fit at a certain time and newer ones do now. Um, Gender identity and sexuality are all fluid. You as a human being, you are a fluid divine human being. So as life changes, you're expected to evolve as well. And I think that's what's so beautiful about being trans is that you're always evolving. So that's always also something to remember too.
Thank you for that. How about you, Maya?
I would say if you think you're trans, you probably are trans. um, and I think what holds back a lot of people is this idea that they don't feel they're like trans enough.
Mm,
That like, oh, well, I don't feel that like this person or that person. Well, all our paths are different. There is no such thing as authentically trans. It is what it is for you, and that's fine. Um, you know, there are a lot of people out there who don't want any surgeries. There are a lot of people out there who don't want to start hormones. There's a lot of people. That doesn't mean they aren't really transgender. Um, and I think that hangs up a lot of people. I think a lot of people are out there struggling with their gender identity because they don't think of it as a spectrum.
right.
They think of it in binary terms because that's the way it's usually presented in the media.
Mhm.
And so it's okay to be a little trans. It's okay to be all these other things. If you don't feel your gender identity, your sexual orientation, whatever doesn't quite fit you, then try something else. Because I think once you find it, the formula that works right. I know for me that once I accepted that I was transgender, it felt like I was suddenly paddling downstream. It felt so easy, you know. I realized that most people don't struggle through their daily lives like I did, you know, that they don't have that kind of mental overhead that they need to edit themselves or not fully express themselves in whatever dimension that is. And that would be my recommendation. You know, try something. You know, don't be locked in by the rules of society. And if it's not right, try something else. You know, try hormones, and if it doesn't feel right, don't do hormones. You know, try dressing, try all these other things. There's so many ways you can express yourself and your gender and your sexual orientation until you find the one that fits.
Thank you for that. It's so true. You know, it's just about making yourself happy and living authentically, and it's not fitting in a box. It's not never think, am I trans enough? It's am I happy? Am I living authentically? That's what you want to worry about. And Maya and Sine, I want to thank you so much. Thank you for being visible. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for making Florida a better place. And everyone that's watching, if you're trans or non-binary and struggling with your identity, first and foremost, understand you are amazing. Your experience is valid. However you choose to identify or express yourself is valid. If any of us followed what society wanted us to do, we would not be here living authentically today. So don't feel confined by society to fit into this box. Just worry about being visible and living happily. And I also want to say visible can kind of come across a certain way. Being visible doesn't mean you have to go to the rally, doesn't mean you have to be an activist. Being visible is just being you. It could be going to the park. It could be going to the store. That's being visible. So by no means are we saying that everyone has to be out and screaming about their gender identity. If that doesn't make you comfortable, that's okay. But if it does, come on down because we love it, you know? So I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. It's been so great. I feel like it's been so long since we've done a trans chat. And thank you all for joining us, and happy Trans Day of Visibility, everyone. Have a great evening.